Greetings. So you're ready to sell your home. I'm excited about that. Whether it's your first time or you are a seasoned seller and you have sold homes before, I am delighted and honored that you would allow me to assist you to do that. So thank you so much for choosing me and Weikert Realtors to get your house sold. All right? So let's talk about a couple of things. How do you get started? Well, in order to do that, number one, I would like to start with looking at comparable properties. Comparable properties give me an idea of what your property is going to sell for. Once I know how many bedrooms, bathrooms, and that kind of things, upgrades that you've done, then that's going to help me provide information to you to determine how much the property should be listed for. The list price is what you are desiring to sell it for. So it starts off with that. Once we have a meeting of the minds that that's a good price for you to sell your house, then we're going to do the listing agreement. The listing agreement is a legally binding document that basically hires the realtor to sell your house. For your realtor to bring all their experience, knowledge, expertise to helping you get that house sold in record time and for the best possible price. I want to talk about the listing agreement and the total package. It starts with disclosures. One of the first disclosures that you will sign is called understanding who the real estate agent represents. In a transaction, there's a buyer and a seller, and each, the buyer and the seller, have a right to have their own agent. That is to make sure that everybody's best interest is being represented by their agent. All right. Second to that disclosure is something called dual agency, a consent to dual agency. What that means is, in this instance, in the state of Maryland, Weikert becomes a dual agent when the listing agent, myself, and another agent has the buyer, and we both work for Weikert. That creates a dual agent situation generally. Now, if you were going to, the agent was going to be represented by both of the buyer and seller is represented by both, that's a whole different situation. It requires consent. But the initial consent says it's okay for Weikert to list my property as well as for a Weikert agent to show my property. So that's very important to understand. So those are the disclosures, understanding who the agent represents and dual agency. They're both very important to understand. From there, we go to the listing agreement. The listing agreement is the contract, the legally binding contract that you sign with the realtor that's going to allow the realtor to represent you in the transaction. We gather all your information. The first thing that we do is establish the listing period. Typically, I like to see 5 to 6 months. It doesn't usually take that long, particularly in the market that we've been in, but it's a good frame to, in case there's anything that goes along the way that you don't have to re-sign that agreement. So 5 to 6 months is a good period. Also in the listing agreement is the agreed upon sales price based upon the comps and the condition. Condition is very important to the property. Why is that very important? Because at some point the buyer is going to have an appraisal. So we have to have, as the listing agent, I have to be able to substantiate why that price is the price based upon the upgrades, the neighborhood, recent sales, things like that. So we have to come to a meeting of minds on the price that can be supported later for the appraisal for the buyer. In the listing agreement, it also talks about this putting the property on the market. Sometimes we use a coming soon status. That means it may not quite be ready, but it's out there enough so that people begin to see that it's coming. And that's a good marketing strategy. The other things that are in here that I want to highlight, and I encourage you, when I send you the document, I send it twice. I send it once so you can read what it says, and I send it the second time so you can sign it. But at first you want to read it to make sure that you understand, ask any questions. There are no stupid questions, not at all. Only unasked ones. So please ask. If you want to know something, ask, okay? So also in this listing agreement, something I wanted to highlight was home security that records audio. In this day and age, we have cameras everywhere, and that's a good thing to be able to look and see what's going on in your home. But what you're not allowed to do is record what they're saying. That the seller will refrain from recording and listening to what people said about the house so that they feel free to discuss it openly and honestly. So that's very important, that you don't have your audio where you can listen in or even record when people are showing the house. Seller responsibility, that just says you're going to make sure that the insurance is there, that the mortgage is paid, that there's no damage that's done to the property while it's still yours. It talks about marketing in the listing agreement, and it talks about repairs. If there's some repairs that need to be done, you probably want to go ahead and get that done before it goes on the market. It's a much better presentation. And that includes light bulbs, because you may know that you need to replace a light bulb, but the buyer may think, oh my God, it's an electrical problem. So you just want to walk through and make sure those kinds of things are all taken care of. The broker compensation. Broker compensation is not an established figure. It's negotiated, and I've seen anything from 5 up to 7%, and we talk about that. It's in the best interest to market your property in the best way possible. Some compensation can be a part of that. There's something called a expiration termination period, where I said that listing goes for about 5 months maybe. So what if you're at the end of that 5 months and you just got that contract? Then you don't have to sign another listing agreement if we have what's called a 60-day protection period that allows you time to finish out the contract. The other thing that happens with the commission, and this is very important to understand, is that the seller pays the commission to both the buyer's agent and the listing agent. That's what's done typically in this area and around the country. What happens is that it's, say for instance, a 6% commission. The 6%, 3% will go to Weichert, 3% will go to Brand X, whoever that other realtor company is representing the buyer. What happens on the other end is then again it's split depending on your relationship with your broker. So that 5 or 6% doesn't go to any one person. It typically ends up being split 4 ways. All right. So that's important to understand. Cooperating with brokers. So that's where that comes in. Again, you're cooperating. You want to have sub-agents. You want to have buyer's agents. Whoever can get your property sold, you want them to get people in the house. That's very important. One of the other things, a ministerial acts. That's very simple. Say, for instance, the buyer's agent couldn't meet the termite guy there. Then the listing agent can go let that person in. Does not establish a relationship by any means. Another important thing is smoke alarm notice. You'll see that in the package. In the state of Maryland in 2018, it says your smoke alarms can be no older than 10 years old and have 10-year lithium battery backup smoke alarms, because it wants to make sure that all the smoke alarms in the house are up to date. Depending on when your house is built, it specifies exactly what you need to do. In some homes, there needs to be a smoke detector in every bedroom, depending on when it was built. But you'll see that in that document that's part of the listing agreement. And we're going to talk about disclosures in a second. Renovations, repairs, and painting of the property. You want to make sure that it was done by a licensed contractor, because that could come back and be a problem if the person wasn't licensed that did the work, and you have an inspector that comes in, and somebody comes in and says, did a licensed contractor do this? So you want to make sure that it's somebody that's really adept at what they do. Disclosures. We're going to talk about that. One of the things you want to disclose is called a deferred water and sewer assessment. That typically comes about if your property was fairly new. And when recent construction, when that property was constructed, the builder took the cost on for bringing in the sewer and bringing in the water. And typically that cost is split among the buyers or the owners in that subdivision for typically about 25 to 30 years. So if you know that exists, you always want to let your realtor know whether or not you are paying a private water company the deferred water and sewer charges. That's very important. It doesn't happen when in some of the older established neighborhoods that probably fell off already, but if it's a fairly newer development, you want to make sure that you let the listing agent know that. Authority to disclose existing offers. Sometimes it's a good thing. People will call, agents will say, do you have offers on the property already? And you can say, oh, well, the seller doesn't want you to disclose that. Or you can say, oh, yeah, we have 3 already. Write your best offer. It all depends, and we'll discuss that a little bit later. The other thing in here, I encourage you to read it. It's talking about conservation easement, all kinds of things about the property. And we'll talk about that as we move over to disclosure shortly. There's another document that you're going to complete called the inclusions, exclusions. This document talks about what stays with the property. All personal effects, they do not stay at the property. Let's say, for instance, you have a pool table that you want to leave. Then you will specifically say that the pool table conveys, or it will stay with the house. You want to tell people that. They may not want it. But you cannot take cabinets down. You cannot take built-in bookshelves down, things like that. They convey with the property. And there's a list here where you check off what stays in the property or what's in the property. And you'll see that, and we can walk through that as well. Let's talk about the property disclosure first. The property disclosure basically tells the buyer what the seller knows about the property. It's not a professional opinion, it's just what you know. Has it been treated for termites? Does the water stand on the property for 2 days after a heavy rain? Things that you would just know just because you lived there. So that's the property disclosure. You can do what's called disclaim as well. Disclaim says, I don't know, or I'm just not going to say. And you could do that. Say, for instance, you were selling an estate property and you didn't live there. You would disclaim because you don't know. You don't know what happened in the property on a day-to-day basis. But that's a very important document. It must be in the hands of the buyer immediately. It's one of the disclosures that goes out immediately. One of the other disclosures that goes out immediately, we call it the DNA. Prince George's County Disclosure and Notice Addendum. It's like they want to know all kinds of things about the property, whether there's a tree conservation, recorded title holder, special taxing, general aviation, just a lot of things that you would know as the homeowner. And we'll go over that, and I encourage you to read it. There's a lot to read in there, but generally you can answer the questions fairly easily. And again, reading is fundamental. We want you to read it, and if you have any questions, to ask. All right? Again, we talked about the disclosure on the deferred water and sewer. We talked about that. If your property was built prior to 1978, you're going to do what's called a lead disclosure. Not whether you know or you don't know of the existence of any lead in the property. That is lead-based paint. How would you know? Say, for instance, it was built prior to 1978, but you had all the windows, they're brand new, and typically the lead is exposed or disturbed when you take something like a window out that's been there forever, and so maybe the lead particles can be in the air, but you disclose that. You say, hey, it was built previous to 1978, this could be an issue. And again, that is the listing agreement. But the most important thing that people want to know about the listing agreement is, what is the net? How much money am I going to make? Well, let's talk about the seller's net sheet very briefly. One of the things about the net sheet is that it's comprised of a couple of things, and I think it's important to understand that. The seller's is, first of all, it's an estimate. It's an estimate based upon price. What is the price? Are you getting your price? Is it going over your price? So this is an estimate depending on what the final price of the house will be. It consists of transfer and recordation taxes in Maryland, Prince George's County, or whatever county you're selling in. And those charges are county driven, state driven. There's nothing you can do about them. Unfortunately, Maryland is the highest in the land. But it is what it is, and you have to pay them or you're not going to sell the house. So when you sell your house, they're going to get a piece of the action. The other thing that's on the seller's net is whether or not you have a mortgage that needs to be paid off. You will give your information to a title company once you have a ratified contract and you're moving forward to selling. Then they will get your mortgage information and find out what your payoff is. Your payoff amount may not be what you see on your statement. It may be more. There might be some fees that they add to it. But that mortgage amount, and we estimate it, of course, it's on your seller's net to tell you basically what you will have to pay off once you sell your house. After that is the commission. That's going to be on there. So that commission is it that goes to those 4 different directions. That's going to be on there too. So that's going to be one of the costs. And the addition is title costs. there are title fees associated with it. So again, the seller's net sheet comprises of state and transfer taxes that you have to pay. And I want to make this point because sometimes people don't know it until the end and they're shocked, especially buyers. Particularly a time of year when you have just paid your taxes, at settlement, the buyer will reimburse you your taxes. So that becomes a cost to them and a credit to you. So you're going to get back any money that you may have paid on taxes that needs to be reimbursed. And that also goes with homeowners association if you have paid dues. It's another important point that belongs in the listing agreement. If there is a homeowners association, we need to get that information. We need to know what the monthly amount is going to be, and whether you pay it monthly, quarterly, or annually, and to whom you pay it. That's very important because we have to disclose that information to the potential buyer. There's something called a resale package. You have to order that from your HOA because they're going to sell, let people know whether or not there are any violations or everything is fine, that there are no deficits in terms of what's due, in terms of your homeowner's dues, things like that. So that's an additional addendum to the listing agreement if you have a homeowners association. So we're talking about the in the estimated seller's net is paying the state county transfers. You can't get around them. You got to pay off your existing mortgage, which could be more than what you're looking at on your statement, depending on additional fees. And then there are the title costs. What is going to cost you to settle? Typically, it's just settlement fees. People call them different things depending on the title company, but there are also fees that you have to just pay, part of selling the house. And then after that, it's going to give you what all of those costs add up to. And then at the end of that, drum roll, it's going to tell you how much you're actually going to net and walk away with. So that is the seller's net sheet. That's the important thing. So I wanted to go over the listing agreement with you so you understand what we're entering into, how we enter into it, and what's next. That's another video. We'll talk about what happens when you have that ratified contract. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.